So good morning and welcome everybody to the Blockchain Ireland monthly meeting for January 2021. You can see from the agenda slide that I'll share again in a moment that we have quite a packed program for you this morning, both of speakers and progress for the group. This morning, we're just going to have some welcome remarks from Professor Joyce O'Connor of the Blockchain Ireland steering group. And then we will have John Whelan from Banco Santander. And John is going to talk about Bitcoin and the future of financial services industry. So a little exploration there of some of the possibilities around the technologies. Then we are going to hear from the working group leads for Blockchain Ireland, and we'll hear the specific aims and goals for each of the groups. Then we'll have our second speaker, Rodrigo Megdenberg of Digital Asset, and Rodrigo is going to talk about digital asset modeling language and the technologies and infrastructures around supporting the new enterprise applications and then onto smart contracts. So then I'm going to hand back to Professor Joyce O'Connor just for some information around the next meeting in February and some developments around there as well. So just a reminder that this morning's session is being recorded for the possibility of later presentation. Now, the other thing is that at the bottom of your screen, you will see that you have an option for Q&A. So that'll be open throughout the presentations this morning. So please do feel free to add a question or a comment or whatever there, and I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the meeting, and we'll be addressing those to the speakers as well. There is a Q&A slot for each of the speakers there. With that, I'll hand over to Professor O'Connor just for some welcome remarks. Joyce?
Thanks very much, Paul, and a very warm welcome to all of you this morning. This is the third meeting of Blockchain Ireland Cluster Technology Ireland ICT Skillnet. My name is Joyce O'Connor, and I'm co-founder and chair of BlockW, a female-led network whose mission is to create awareness around blockchain and other emerging technologies and to encourage equity and diversity in the uptake of blockchain technologies. So on behalf of the steering group, a particular welcome to all of you, our blockchain community. One of the underlying themes of today's meeting is around leadership. And I'd like to announce that Davy has been appointed as the inaugural chair of Blockchain Ireland Cluster. We're really delighted with this, Dave, and we wish you all the best, and we look forward to working with you over the next year. And thank you for taking up this appointment. At our last meeting, we asked you, the blockchain community, to help provide leadership as well in the next phase of development of Blockchain Ireland Cluster through our working groups. And thank you for doing this. And today, as Paul has said, we will introduce you to the chairs of the working groups who will set out their objectives and thoughts. Very interesting development at European level. There's been great leadership there in the publication of the European blockchain strategy. And Roberto Viola, the DG of DG Connect, who has responsibility for the area, shows great vision for this technology. He sees Europe's ambition is to set the gold standard for blockchain technologies. He sees Europe implementing a strong regulatory and policy framework which supports sustainable blockchain innovation as well as startups and scale-up ecosystems. He also sees member states across Europe playing a trailblazing role in implementing this exciting and essential new technology. So we are all part of this ecosystem. So the challenge is there for us in Blockchain Ireland to become involved in this, to help implement this strategy by developing our own strategy and plan. And we need you, the blockchain community here today, to be part of this. And we want you to be part of the process in developing this strategy. Talking about gold standards, we've John Whelan, a Carlo man working in Madrid with Banco Santander. As Paul has said, he's going to speak to us about the future of financial services, and he's setting this gold standard in relation to that future. And we've Rodrigo Megenberg, who will talk about digital assets. So a very busy and interesting morning ahead, I think. And I'll hand you over now to our moderator, Paul Hearns, who will set out the agenda again and introduce our speakers and chairs for the working groups. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Professor O'Connor. As said there, we'll move straight to our first speaker. John Whelan is Managing Director of Digital Assets and Innovation at Banco Santander's Corporate and Investment Bank in Madrid. And he's long been involved in blockchain-related projects since 2014, and many initiatives since joining the bank in 2016 to lead its blockchain lab. So to talk about Bitcoin and the future of the financial services industry, John?
Paul, thank you very much for the introduction. And Joyce, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to Blockchain Ireland. I think it's been a while since we crossed paths back in, I think it was September, October 2019. At a talk there on Upper Merrion Street. Unfortunately, lockdown has changed all of that. As was mentioned, I'm actually the Managing Director of Digital Investment Banking and Innovation at Banco Santander here in Madrid, in Spain. And as such, I cover a whole myriad of different business applications and use cases across a range of technologies, including artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, blockchain, DLT, user experience, and all these other things. But there is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, where I am the program manager for Santander's digital assets program and have been since 2018. Interestingly enough, my own journey is somewhat convoluted in how I landed here. Grew up in Carlow, did an engineering degree in University College Dublin in the late 80s, early 90s, and in 1993 landed in Chicago on a Morrison visa, like many of us of our generation did, with no job, no money, nowhere to live. And nothing but a backpack in my hand and a guitar. And took the path of very rapidly delving into the engineering space, which was my background. Worked as an engineer for a while, ended up as a floor trader at the Chicago Board Options Exchange. And from there, stint in the managing consulting business and ended up founding a technology startup in 2011, which very rapidly became a blockchain startup in 2012, which was a really, really interesting time to actually discover, at that time, only one blockchain, really, which was Bitcoin. And I think it's always helpful to, before we talk about the future of financial services and the impact of distributed ledger technology, blockchain technology, and smart contracts, to have an understanding about why we're here and what brought us here. And what brought us here was this incredible invention in 2009, which is Bitcoin itself. It actually it solved the problem of digital scarcity. It actually solved three problems, which led to digital scarcity. Number one, it solved counterparty risk. There are no counterparties to Bitcoin in the Bitcoin network. It solved counterfeiting risk, otherwise known as double spending. And number three, it solved a computer science problem that had existed for 40 years called the Byzantine generals problem, which is really about how a distributed network, reaches agreement on the overall state of the network, otherwise known as consensus. And it attracted very rapidly a network of real enthusiasts, cypherpunks, people who are interested in cryptography, people who are interested in somewhat libertarian philosophies, open source software. And it was round about 2012 that the first, I would say, really interesting development happened on Bitcoin, and that was the ability to represent a non-Bitcoin asset, in other words, something else, as a digital token. And it was actually performed by recording what's called a meta token on the Bitcoin network. It was the first experiment in increasing the functionality of Bitcoin. At the time, some of you may remember Mastercoin or what later became Omni or colored coins. These are ways of recording digital assets in the Bitcoin network on the normal Bitcoin network. And at the same time, the first, what I would call blockchain 1.5 application launched. That company was called Ripple. It's still around today. it launched a network that was able to not only record digital assets, but also perform the exchange of one asset to another, almost like a smart contract, but not quite, not fully programmable, but a step in that direction. And in 2013, Bitcoin really exploded into the scene, into public consciousness, simply because of price volatility, where it crossed $1,000 in value for the first time. And it was shortly after that then that banks started to get interested. And I think banks started to get interested simply because there was a recognition, hey, there's something new. It's a volatile digital asset. It has some interesting properties. Maybe we should begin to examine the potential of using a network like this within our own industry. And there was a call for publication, actually, from Banco Santander in Madrid, for a consultant to conduct a study into the impact of cryptocurrencies on banks. And it just so happens that I was the consultant that was selected to do that particular study. It was a long 20, 30-page, long-winded document full of, technical facts and figures. But the simple essence of the study was that it's not about the coin, it's about the ledger, which actually seems obvious now. And that was the recognition in kind of 2014 that, yes, Bitcoin is interesting and it's a super interesting phenomenon all by itself. But a step forward is it's not about the coin, it's about the ledger. It's about a record-keeping system that's distributed among parties that don't necessarily trust each other. And in 2014, something else interesting happened, and that was the invention by Vitalik Buterin and Dr. Gavin Woods, of a new blockchain, a fully programmable, what is known as Turing complete blockchain, known as the Ethereum blockchain. And the first white paper was, I think, published in late 2013. In 2014, development started. And in 2015, in July, the first Ethereum blockchain launched. I think it was July 28th, 2015. And now we had come to the point where we had a full utility programmable blockchain that enforced digital scarcity. And then in 2016, I think is when the banks really started getting interested. Several of the banks launched their first blockchain labs. That's when Banco Santander launched its first blockchain lab. And I joined the bank in February 2016 to be the inaugural founder of Banco Santander's blockchain lab in Madrid. I left Chicago, which itself had been an interesting trip, and became an immigrant for the second time here in Madrid in Spain. And we rolled up our sleeves, not just at Banco Santander, but in all of the banks, our colleagues at JP Morgan, at UBS, at Credit Suisse, at BNP Paribas, and other places, to really understand what are the use cases? What can we build with this new technology? And we looked at a lot of different interesting use case, person-to-person payments, cross-border person-to-person payments. Many of us are familiar now with the concept of stablecoins. The word stablecoin didn't even exist back then. But now we know that we can take a digital form of cash where the money is held somewhere in a custody account at a bank account, and we can create a token that represents a claim on that cash and transfer that token to the other side of the world instantly. And now we have a payment rail that is global in scope, where the cost of operating the payment rail is effectively externalized or outsourced to third-party operators like miners and transaction validators. And we have a way of perhaps moving money 24/7, 365, which around the world, which never really existed before. And that's interesting person to person. It's also very interesting for small and medium enterprises. And when you scale up and go beyond that, we at Santander anyway, we recognized quite rapidly that it was very interesting for large corporates who might be interested, let's say, in deploying real-time treasury cash management solutions on these kinds of systems. And that's when we rapidly moved into the space known as private permission blockchains or consortium blockchains, where the banks very rapidly realized that the characteristics of the public chain, as extremely interesting as it is, don't necessarily lend itself immediately, at least that early version, don't necessarily lend itself immediately to enterprise-grade applications and solutions, primarily because of what I call the 3 Ps: privacy, permissioning, and performance. So at the time, And it's still largely true today, although we're beginning to see possible solutions to this. At the time, the privacy of public blockchains was zero. Yes, transaction addresses are pseudonymous, but truthfully can be mapped back to real individuals. Permissioning, public blockchains at the time, permissioning was a concept that was still under discovery. Now we understand that we can have permissionless validation or permissionless mining of public blockchains and actually permissioned actors on top of the smart contracts. But at that time, we didn't really understand how to do that. And then performance. Even today, the public Ethereum network is not particularly performant. I think maximum transactions per second is about 15 transactions per second. But in terms of a proof of concept and a platform to build interesting things upon, the public Ethereum network was great back then, still is now. And yet, that's when various consortia started to form, groups of banks getting together to say, you know what, let's figure out how we might deploy and build a blockchain network that suits a particular use case for this industry. And it doesn't just apply to banks, because we started to see other industries do the same thing. The mobile telephony industry, we're investigating these things, the commodities industry, oil business, etc. And we've seen since then really a plethora of interesting use cases come into being. And I would say we've moved beyond kind of the historical aspects of blockchain to what are current today. And there are some interesting projects that some of you will be aware of. There's a commodities trade finance blockchain called Comgo that there are many financial industry participants, whether they're banks, whether they're insurance companies, whether they're supply chain shippers. And of course, the users of these blockchain systems are not just the financial industry, but also producers of commodities, bulk commodities, oil companies, mining companies around the world. Another example of one of these supply chain blockchain systems is Contour. Similar concept, a slightly different use case. And then there's a blockchain system that we were one of the original founders of going back to 2017 called Wetrade, which is a blockchain-based trade finance application targeted at small and medium enterprises that do not use the traditional letter of credit form of trade financing, but use what's called open account. Open account is very simple. I ship you the goods and I hope you pay me 60 days later. So there's a way of actually providing a financing mechanism for companies that use open account, whether same country, same currency, cross-border, cross-currency, etc. And we've moved into other applications as well, very much in capital markets, around the lines of digital bonds, digital securities. And I'm proud to say that Banco Santander was one of the was in fact the first issuer of the very first blockchain-based end-to-end digital bond on the public Ethereum network. And by end-to-end, I mean we digitized the security leg and the bond itself. We digitized the cash leg by creating a single-use kind of stable coin using our own custodian, Banco Santander Security Services. And then we performed what is known in the securities industry of delivery versus payment, which is the simultaneous, irrevocable exchange of title of cash and security. And in today's world, the mechanism of DVP, delivery versus payment, is actually performed by a central clearing party, such as Clearstream or Euroclear or similar. And the purpose of a CCP is to simply ensure that an accident doesn't happen and that the issuer of a security doesn't end up with both the security and the cash at the same time, or the investor in the security doesn't end up with both the cash and the security at the same time. But you can use a blockchain to atomically guarantee that can never happen. And that's interesting because now you can reduce a potential counterparty to a transaction. And the transaction that we did, it was conducted under English law, $20 million bond issuance, 1 year maturity, 4 coupons, 1.98% interest. Priced directly from the bank's yield curve that morning. Banco Santander, the corporate parent, was the issuer. Another bank in the group was an investor. I work for the investment bank. We behaved as the dealer. And then Santander's separate securities custodian, Santander Security Services, acted as the custodian in the deal. And even though it was inside the group, we had to have deliberately legal agreements because we have to operate at arm's length. We had legal agreements between each of the individual components of the group. And beyond that, then, we're beginning to see a lot of discussion these days around central bank digital currencies. There are numerous consultations in the marketplace from the ECB related to a programmable digital euro, similar consultation from the Bank of England. Indeed, Her Majesty's Treasury in the United Kingdom just issued a consultation in the last couple of weeks on digital assets and stablecoins. And I believe the Law Commission in the United Kingdom has a live consultation running currently about the nature of smart contracts. Are these little computer programs that live in a blockchain network actually enforceable as contracts? My belief is yes. And even the Chancellor of the High Court would probably agree the same thing, but there's still more work to do before that is verifiably the case in front of a court of law, at least under English law. So there's a myriad of really, really interesting things going on. I would also like to point to our colleagues in the United States. Even though the Federal Reserve itself does not have an open call for a consultation on central bank digital currencies, there are quite a lot of work streams going on in the US related to these topics, whether it's under the banner of the OCC, Office of Comptroller of the Currency, SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, or even CFTC, Commodities Futures Trade Commission, which are the kind of interlinked regulators in the United States that have responsibility for these things. And I myself am actually an advisor to the Digital Dollar Project in the US. So that's where we are today. Any questions so far that I could answer before I get into what I think the future is going to bring?
There is actually one question here, John, that has come in. It's quite an involved one, and it's primarily around privacy concerns. So I'll just read it through here to you and see if it's something you'd like to address now before you go into the rest of it, because it is stemming from the excellent background you gave us there in terms of Bitcoin developing into just the wider usage of DLT in particular. So. Do you think that there is a willful ignorance and or malicious intent within the sector regarding the privacy concerns, including the associated financial and economic integrity and security concerns that go with this? It doesn't seem to be a positive move forward when it is possible for anybody to access transaction information flows once a public key is known. So are there concerns even there, even though so much of this has developed from this sort of zero trust scenario? Are there legitimate concerns there, as you said, in developing it towards enterprise grade?
Absolutely. So a public blockchain network, as we currently know it, has zero privacy. It has pseudo-anonymity, but it has no privacy. Once a public key is mapped to an individual, it is forever mapped to that individual. And there are all kinds of interesting network scanning tools that can help map these things. And by the way, all the tax authorities and all of the regulators and all of the cryptocurrency exchanges are using these mechanisms as a proxy for what is known as standard AML, anti-money laundering and KYC, know your customer, and PEP screening, politically exposed person screening, and everything else that the traditional financial industry does. Now, having said that, those are public networks. Private permission networks that are operated by financial institutions have privacy baked in, simply because the use case is different. In a private permission network that might be operated by the financial industry, the network participants are actually known to each other. So that actually changes the consensus mechanism and the degree of privacy and encryption that you can use. And there are all kinds of interesting, what are known now as layer 2 techniques, using a very, very advanced cryptography, where essentially what you're doing is you're using the base layer, the base network, as the security mechanism, and everything else can live in a private kind of encapsulated capsule above that. And I think that what we're going to see is a very, very robust privacy regime that will satisfy GDPR and everything else, as extreme as GDPR is, and it is one of the more extreme privacy regimes in the world. I think in the private permission space, networks may be jurisdiction appropriate. For instance, I could imagine a securities issuance network that is European Union only, deployed and operated by banks and other FMIs, financial market infrastructures, which complies in every way that you can imagine with the existing privacy regulations. Let me be absolutely clear. Anything that a bank does, anything that a financial institution does, it will be 100% compliant with not just privacy laws, security laws, money laundering laws. Why? Because we have to. It's as simple as that. We have this very expensive license. It's called a banking license. And you don't get to maintain and hold that without complying with these things. Now, having said that, there still, I think, is in the public cryptocurrency world, not necessarily an ambivalence about privacy, because there's a ton of work being done related to privacy. And if you look at what's coming in Bitcoin related to Taproot technology and Schnorr signatures, and these are technical implementations of privacy solutions. There are completely private blockchains. Something like Monero, the privacy is impossible to crack. It's got advanced cryptography that's not only impossible to crack, that's actually mind-bending to understand in some respects. And then the zero-knowledge proof, the ZK rollups and the optimistic rollups and the different layer 2 solutions on top of Ethereum have privacy baked in as well. So I actually think the future, it won't be a concern at all. It has been to date, but I don't think that there have been technical solutions already.
Thank you, John. So I think it's really demonstrating how the base of digital ledger technologies is allowing an expansion into areas that previously simply wouldn't have existed. So I think that's hugely interesting. Just in terms of questions, we don't have too many more in terms of the subject of your talk. I think there probably will be in terms of thought-provoking topics in future, but I think just in the interest of time, we might go on to the working group. So, John, thank you very much. I'm just going to de-emphasize you there now to the rest of the participants so that we can go in onto a slide share. So I'm just going to put up an outline of our working groups now. So there you can see our working groups who will now present. So we have the 6 working groups there. So the Blockchain Ireland Week is the event week, which is coming up later this year, and that's going to be described by Darragh Lawler. Then we have the developer group with Bernard Gahan, and the enterprise group with Ian Keane, legal and regulatory with Pierce Ryan, the startups group with Fiona Delaney, and skills and innovation with Professor Joyce O'Connor again. So I'm going to call on Darragh now. Good morning, all. I'll be as brief as I can. I'm heading up the recently formed Blockchain Ireland Week working group. Myself and Paul are involved in this. We've only just really formed just before Christmas. So at the moment, members are myself, Paul, who's presenting this, and Kevin O'Malley very kindly joined us from PL Waste Reduction Equipment. The key objectives for the programme are to run a Blockchain Ireland Week programme of events in May of this year. We're looking probably most likely at the last week of May, maybe the second last week. Just settling in on that at the moment. And the plan is to prepare and present a program of compelling curated events and material to the broadest possible audience with the view to enhancing general understanding of the potential and opportunity presented by blockchain and distributed ledger and smart contract technologies. We have a key ask for this group, and there will be a mail going out afterwards. We're looking at this point, our timelines for doing all of this is to have a long list of potential topics, presenters, and papers by the middle of February, for curation by the middle of March, with the view to putting together surveys and publicity to lead up to a well-attended, punchy series of events in May. So we would look to this group to come back to us. We have a form up on the Blockchain Ireland site. We'll send out the link after this meeting, and we'd be very obliged if any of you have any suggestions or wish to volunteer yourselves as speakers. We'd be really delighted to get your feedback and input. With that, I'll pass back to the next working group. Many thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bernard Gahan, and thanks to John for a very interesting talk this morning. So just wanted to give you a quick overview. I'm leading the developer working group in Blockchain Ireland. The group started in earnest last year, and we've a call this morning to invite people to participate in the developer working group. So I welcome people who are interested to contribute to contact me or via LinkedIn. The details are on screen there. One thing we'd like to do early this year is to deliver a series of technical talks and directly to the developer community in Ireland. And to help launch that, we've launched a link to a platform to invite speakers to deliver those talks. That link may be found on the Blockchain Ireland LinkedIn page. So we look forward to see your submissions there, and we hope to have our first talk in February. We will also intend to support Blockchain Ireland Week, just mentioned by Dara there, and broadly to contribute to the development of the national blockchain strategy, which will be alluded to later. So it was really just to say hello and introduce myself again, and I look forward to seeing you in the future at future events.
Great. Thank you, Bernard. And we are going to switch over to Ian now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Keane, and I'm the Enterprise Working Group lead. Our working group is just a week old, and it currently consists of 5 members. We've Barbara from Future Energy Foundation, we've Orla from BNY Mellon, we've Miles from CBRE, and we've Patrick from BioLedger, and myself who work for Oracle. Our first objective is to provide some thought leadership on blockchain policy for Ireland. As you heard from Professor Joyce's introduction, Blockchain Ireland are working on a strategy paper to highlight the opportunities which blockchain technology can create in Ireland and how the Irish government should respond in order to capitalise on these opportunities. The Enterprise Working Group will contribute and support to this paper. Our second objective is to highlight impactful use cases of blockchain in enterprise. There's a lot of hype around blockchain, but we want to bring actual successful blockchain implementations and their learnings to share with the wider Irish community. And we aim to achieve this through publishing of blogs and delivering webinars. Our third objective is to align with the Blockchain Ireland legal and regulatory work group to accelerate blockchain adoption in enterprise. For example, there's EU DLT regulation coming into force in 2024, and we want to do our piece to ensure both the Irish government and the wider Irish business community are ready for this. If this interests you and you would like to join Enterprise Working Group, please reach out to me on my email address above, and we can discuss how you can contribute, or even you can add your own objectives that you wish to drive within our working group. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you. And we are going to switch over now to Pierce Ryan.
Hi, folks. It's Pierce. I hope you can hear me and see me.
We can.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I chair the Legal and Regulatory Working Group. We're a long-established working group, well over a year at this stage. We meet monthly, and we have a good smattering of members, as you can see there. We have circa 25 to 27 members at this stage, so that's a large working group. So it's a bit like herding cats, but that's the way of it. We're rather a victim of our own success in terms of membership, but that's very welcome. And indeed, we welcome further members. We'll come to that in a moment. So we regularly have circa 12 to maybe 15, 16, 17 folks at each meeting. Last month, by way of example, December, we had an excellent presentation from John Salmon, a lawyer with Hogan Lovells in London. He leads their FinTech international practice. And we had a presentation from Alexandros Saratakis, an academic in TTD. John spoke about the European Commission initiative on crypto assets, MiCA, which I think a number of the speakers have mentioned. And Alexandros spoke about a European Commission initiative around DLT. We have a meeting on the 28th, and we'll have 3 speakers by way of example. We look at a recent initial exchange offering, which has a form of link to Ireland. We will look at the recent current UK Law Commission consultation exercise on the legal status of smart legal contracts, and we will have a view on the market in crypto assets, MiCA, from the perspective of the stock exchange. So that's 3 speakers at the meeting on the 28th. So we have a busy agenda to look at matters from a legal and regulatory perspective. So kind of our agenda, to a certain extent, is not made by ourselves, but is made by others. And we're more reactive, analysing and reviewing and trying to place some logic in these things. And we earlier heard of the uncertainty around the legal status of, in that case, smart legal contracts. So that's an example. Another example is the question of data protection. Those are the types of things we look at. So we have a busy year ahead of us. with lots of initiatives and programs to review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierce. And now we are going to go over to Fiona Delaney from the Startups Group.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today with you all. I was appointed to this role about a week ago, so we are fresh and new. You can see here a list of some of the individuals we've been talking to from a number of different startups across a number of different verticals. There are some asset-based initiatives. There's some social networking initiatives. My own company is an agri-tech company. There's 2 other food companies here. And we are open and welcoming any participation from Irish startups who would like to be involved. So our objectives at the moment, I would say we need to, evangelize and raise awareness about what we're doing and drive membership of the working group. We need to determine a strategic direction for ourselves. I'm mostly guided by open innovation practices, and that would be looking outwards to inform, challenge, and grow, I suppose, what we can get out of our network. Definitely, we will be looking to take visible and proactive steps to share achievements and concerns from the Irish BDLT startup ecosystem, and it would be an aim to contribute to the development of the national blockchain strategy. I would just add there, as many of my colleagues have, that we would, personally, we're very Eurocentric, I suppose, and Euro-focused. We get European funding, and if that is some kind of information or knowledge base that we can share in our group about access to European funding and the direction that's been taken in Europe, that's something that we'll be looking at. Open for questions, and I very much encourage any of the attendees at Blockchain Ireland who are representing a startup to at least connect, and perhaps we can collaborate together. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Fiona. And now we're going on to Professor Joyce O'Connor and the Skills and Innovation Group.
Thanks very much, Paul. And the Skills and Innovation working group has just been established in the last week also. So as you can see, we've a number of members: David Roach from Promericus, Saoirse Mulligan from the SME chain, Carmel Summers from ICT Skillnet, and of course David Feenan from Blockchain Ireland ICT Skillnet. So we're really open to members. We would like you to participate, because no matter where you are, digital skills are important. Introducing them into the workplace, maybe people want a career change, looking at the opportunities. So our first task is to undertake blockchain skills analysis to see where are the needs, how can we develop programs either through Skillnet or through the colleges, the universities, Institute of Technology, National College of Ireland, and other groups. And out of that skills analysis, we will look to develop programs or micro credentials, small modules, so that we can really increase awareness and uptake of blockchain. We would like specifically to look at blockchain program for business leaders, because we feel they need to know what's going on in this area. We saw from John Whelan how the future is changing, what can happen with the use of blockchain. And we need to ask business leaders, what they want in that area. And will also, of course, feed into the development of the Blockchain Ireland strategy document. So I'd ask you again, we'd really like you to participate. You see my email there, get in touch, and we would like your input and your suggestions as well. So we look forward, and I look forward to working with you on this working group. Thank you very much, Paul. Over to you again.
Thank you very much, Professor O'Connor. And we appreciate the input from all of the working group leads there. Thank you very much for presenting all of that. So we're just going to go on now to a brief update on policy from steering group member Laurie Keogh.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. So in addition to having our monthly meetings, also the establishment of working groups and Blockchain Ireland Week, our fourth deliverable that we discussed in November and December for 2021 within Blockchain Ireland is around creating a national strategy. And this is really working with all of you and working with the working groups to determine exactly what that is. So what I wanted to just touch on here, and we can scroll through the rest of the points here, that's if that's okay. Thank you very much. So the process that we're currently undertaking is that there's background research, which has already started, and that's really looking at what other countries are doing. So such as Australia, France, Italy, Germany, UK, and a number of those countries actually have a national blockchain strategy. So what we're looking at is, what are they doing? What's interesting? What should we perhaps look to emulate and can learn from? And we're also, I guess, engaging with a number of those entities as well and bringing them to the community as part of these sessions on a monthly basis. The second step is to engage. So we had a meeting with Barry Lowry, the Irish government CIO, a number of weeks back, and we'll be meeting with him and his team again in order to determine, you know what, if we are going to write this paper, can we do it together almost from the start? So what are the things that they're interested in? What are the problems that they're experiencing? And what are the possible opportunities? And then also, how do we agree to work together instead of it being, that we create a paper and then we kind of throw it over the fence at them? How do we work with them throughout the process? And Barry and his team have been extremely receptive to that. The third area then is very much working with all of you and working with the working groups and working group leads to determine what is important to you guys and what should be in the paper. And what are the things we need to work on in terms of what are the aspects that you have? Is it funding? Whatever it may be. And then fourthly, it is to, I guess, it's to finish the paper, present its findings and share it back to the government. And really looking for items that are actionable that the government can take on to establish Ireland as a global blockchain hub. And that's the goal. So thank you very much for your time. And Paul, back to you.
Thank you, Laurie. Now, thank you very much, everybody. So we are going to proceed now with our second speaker. So Rodrigo is director at Digital Asset and responsible for performance, GTM, hiring, alignment, and sales resources in EMEA. And he is going to talk about something that was already mentioned, digital asset modeling language and its place in creating a new infrastructure for the new breed of applications that we're going to see in industry. So Rodrigo, if we could switch to you. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning.
No, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, Professor O'Connor, and thank you, Blockchain Ireland. It's a privilege to be here with you this morning and introduce you to Digital Asset and DAML, as John Whelan has already set us up. And I couldn't ask for a better setup, I guess, for the presentation in terms of what I'm going to show you today. But before I start talking a little bit about Digital Asset, I wanted to just mention that we are most likely perceived as an infrastructure provider, but what Digital Asset is really known about is creating a development framework that creates systems of record that security connects across business processes. And everything that we do is born out of, I would say, DLT or blockchain, but I think we would like to be seen as, solving business problems first and obviously applying technology later. So a little bit about us. So who are we? Well, we are a startup. We were founded in 2014. We currently have a little bit over 150 employees. We had 4 technology acquisitions. So one of them that the listeners this morning might be familiar with is Hyperledger. We actually acquired Hyperledger and subsequently gave the IP and the naming rights to the Linux Foundation. So one of our founders, who still is part of our C-suite, is one of the Hyperledger founders. Another acquisition happened in Zurich, where we acquired a company that is actually the creators of our smart contract language called DAMO. One of the things that I want to mention is that, John said quite accurately that I guess our space has been born in financial services. But as you can see, more and more people are taking interest in digital, assets or in the DLT space itself. And with that, obviously, you see a lot of tech giants like Samsung or VMware being part of, I would say, some of our investors, because they are seeing different use cases that we will talk upon in later stages around how to utilize digital assets, how to, provide infrastructure to businesses. So if we take a step back and if you think about the history that John talked about this morning, a lot of these projects and these use cases were quite revolutionary. The main, I would say, challenge that you faced is that in order to prove some of these use cases, John talked about things like privacy, performance, permissioning, counterparty risk. You needed to build an infrastructure to really prove your, proof of concept or your MVP. So what that meant was that, over the last, I would say, 3 years, we saw a lot of these projects taking, sometimes 2 years before any, investment or business case could be proven. So in essence, you had a plethora, I would say, of infrastructure providers who created their own, I would say, almost like an arms race to create their own network to prove some of these use cases. So one of the visions that we have is, we want to provide technology to businesses across and be truly, I would say, industry agnostic. And how can we do that, delivering value today? How can we give you, a development framework that will allow you to prove your business case in a much shorter time span, but then have the vision for taking that application, whatever you have built, and really apply it either on a distributed ledger technology or in fact, any other ledger or database. So that is literally what we set out to do. So instead of think about us of the providers that built complete database infrastructures or ledger provider from scratch, we are more to be seen as the application area, which I will talk upon in a second. Now, below here, you see some of our selected customers, and obviously one of the first things that you notice is, again, we are obviously very keen and close with financial services or capital markets. Some of the, I would say, companies that we work with or that we're known for is, as an example, ASX. ASX is the exchange in Australia where we are actually currently replacing the back-end system called Chess with our technology and trying to truly be, permissioned privacy and secure infrastructure, as John talked about earlier. So what if you think about the systems that are currently, legacy systems that are currently out there, you've got basically 3 types. You've got on-premise fragile infrastructure, so mainframes. So going back to my example about the Australian exchange, believe it or not, they still run mainframes. And in the world today, you still have about 3 trillion transactions per day that are transacted through these mainframe applications. Then you've got message-based communications where, truly revolutionary, probably 30 years ago, they are still reconciling across silos, and it's absolutely a nightmare and expensive to either maintain or to upgrade. And then, with the birth of the cloud, we saw a plethora of, applications from Workday and Salesforce, Zendesk, etc. But obviously, sometimes this data and the code is still duplicated across multiple places. So you've got obviously complex system integrations. Now, what we set out to do is how can, this new technology that emerged, out of Bitcoin and out of blockchain, how can we assist? And this is where smart contracts, I would say, come into play. So how do we improve these business processes? If you think about not having a common data model, as I said in the slide before, how do you have these shared models? How do you think about these complex workflows where, as with smart contracts, they're multi-party by design? And what does multi-party by design mean? Well, it literally means that you're able to, on the application layer, on your app, assign different players that have different rights and obligations. And when we dwell a little bit more into smart contracts, you're going to hopefully understand what that means. The third aspect here about heterogeneous technologies is that, over the years, a lot of these, depending on where you are, banks is a very good example. There's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening where people had to, almost glue together different technologies. That's what, heterogeneous technologies mean. What happened is that you couldn't really talk from one, system to another. So how do you achieve this true interoperability? This is where, we believe, again, smart contracts can truly assist in becoming, I would say, the standard to linking two systems together without maybe even having to replace them from, in the first phase. You've got other, challenges like bilateral messaging and manual reconciliations where, obviously you're always trying to find the golden source of truth. So who is, or what is DAML? So DAML is, as we said, a smart contract that allows businesses to build applications. But more than anything, it is I would say, a concise language. It, adopts, and it's quickly to, I would say, prototype use cases where you focus on your business logic and not on the infrastructure. When you build contracts in financial services, if you build applications, how to write interest rate swaps or anything else for that matter, you would see that most of the times you spend about 90% of the time writing code just to assign attributions on security, on privacy, on connecting to the underlying ledger, but not really focusing on the actual problem you're trying to solve. And that is where I would say DAML comes in, and it's quite intuitive to use. It needs to be efficient. Coming back to what I said earlier around, most of the projects taking years, you need to be able to deliver it with the highest level of security and obviously in a very short time frame. It has to be fit for purpose. I think we've seen a lot of applications trying to shoehorn certain things into a particular data set because you have a new technology, and it just doesn't work. And the last one, the most important one, it needs to be portable and interoperable. So as I said before, we currently live in a world where there's, I would say, an arms race about all these different infrastructure providers that are trying to assist in creating our space and not creating our space, but creating actually a network of their own. Obviously, in business, you're trying to become the de facto, I would say, ledger that people are going to use. But by creating all these multiple ledgers, you're actually creating, again, silos on their own. Now, for some use cases, depending on if you're in financial services or in healthcare or in trade finance, as we heard earlier, they make sense. But later on, if you fast forward 5 years, you want to be able to connect or even maybe move some of your applications from one ledger to the other. So that's what portability means. And then obviously you want to be interoperable. You want to be able to, even amongst DLT, even among distributed ledgers, maybe connect from one transaction to another. An example would be here, we heard about digital currencies earlier. So imagine if in Europe you have a digital currency by the ECB, and you've got something else running in the States where the Fed creates something that runs maybe on Ethereum, and you've got something in Europe that runs on Hyperledger Fabric. How would you be able to talk to another? That's one of the challenges that we're trying to solve with our framework. So if you're new to the space just very quickly from I would say academic point of view. What are smart contracts? So DAML starts from building blocks of rights and obligations. Very, very simple. Now what you see here in the template is using bonds, similar to what John talked earlier. You've got, as a bondholder, you've got certain rights. And as the issuer, you also have the ability to pay coupons, etc. So basically, our smart contracts are built in such a way that you assign rights and obligations. You could also look at it from the fact of if I'm a tenant and there's a landlord, I as a tenant, I have rights to live there. I have the obligation to pay rent. All of this are things that can be literally handled via smart contracts. So it doesn't only apply in finance, it can apply to any number of use cases, from provenance, where does my food come from, to vaccination. Is it really, the vaccine that I'm getting, where does it come from? And, can I trace it back through a value chain? So DAML powers infrastructure and also enables this tokenization that we heard and is in the news. So the ability to really have new and existing asset classes without having to reinvent, I would say, an application or language to be able to control them. So sometimes, DLT in our space is very esoteric, and people think like, I don't understand, what, Rodrigo, what is it really, how do I perceive digital asset? Where does it stake? So one of the things that you should think of, and maybe an analogy, back in the day, Java, if you were a developer, and you were writing applications for databases, Java was created out of the need to write applications and have a common layer, common language that people could utilize. Now, if you're a developer, you know that you don't write applications on the database itself. So you write applications for what it's called JDBC. In other words, what is the common glue so that people could really create value using databases was Java. The same you could think of Windows, there was a commoditized space when you think about personal computers, and Microsoft Windows was the enabler where everybody, from a user perspective, was able to start utilizing it. Now we see DAML pretty much the same way. There's a lot of languages, a lot of technology out there in the distributed ledger technology space. We've heard VMware blockchain has been launched, Microsoft Azure, Hyperledger Fabric. There's a lot of, I would say, infrastructure providers, but they all have, I would say, their own privacy, performance, permissioning protocols. And how do you make sense of it all? How do you start, obviously, as a startup, building your application? And how do you even choose where you are going to be hosting your application? And I think this is where DAML provides this, I would say, very nice ledger agnostic framework to be able to take your application maybe today on Hyperledger Fabric, and in 5 years' time, use the same applications and take it with you and put it on a different ledger. So when presenting technology, people always talk about their stack and architecture stack. So this is just to give you a little bit of context of where we sit. What is it that you get with with digital asset and DAML? So we are, as I said before, at the very top of here. We want to be known as the business logic application where people. Businesses are industry agnostic, utilize DAML to prove and build applications. Now, we do have, obviously, in our technology stack, SDKs and other, I would say, intelligent software that allows you to connect via so-called DAML drivers to the underlying ledgers. It could be Hyperledger Fabric, Ethereum, Corda, etc. So here again, I would say, the ability to be agnostic is what I'm trying to come through that, we are fully integrated, and we do provide obviously the ability to get you going. So if you are a startup and listening today, we have something called DAML Hub, where you're able to, get a managed service, I would say, ledger as a service, and take, whatever application you're building, and once you're live, you're able to take it and put it on Ethereum or Hyperledger Fabric and all these other wonderful, I would say, ledgers that are out there depending on your use case. But I would say one of the truest challenges that the industry currently faces is interoperability. You've seen, in the previous slide, all these ledgers, and you've seen, that they are built, sometimes even quite secure on their own technology stack. But how do we then, as a society, are able to share value assets, digital assets, from one of these islands to another? I mean, here, if you think about what you see depicted on this picture, you could think again, as my previous example, about digital currencies. It could be, how do you have, one infrastructure in Europe and the Fed in the States, etc. So this is where we are trying to really build and connect networks together across different platforms. And we do that with what we designated a DAML Canton protocol. So on top of, the DAML, our programming language that I explained earlier, we are devising a protocol and are putting it in place where you can create a layer of abstraction where it's going to give us the ability to truly have atomic transactions across different ledgers. And if you think about the challenges in our space today, I would say this is probably one of the number one topics shared across all these forums. So in the end, what is our mission? Well, we're truly trying to build a global network of networks. We do believe, again, that, irrespective of use case, either an exchange or healthcare provider, that you're able to utilize our technology stack and connect maybe with one ledger today, but really have the ability to take your technology use case if you're a startup, and once you're ready to go, to put it into action into either a distributed ledger technology, which is obviously why we're all here today, or in fact, if you're not ready to do so, you can still run it on a traditional database. So I know I've been quite doing a monologue, so I am happy to stop here and maybe take some questions.
Great, Rodrigo. Thank you very much for that. That's quite a comprehensive overview. I would maybe put one question to you, which might contextualize this a little bit. It's over the last number of years, we've seen enterprise applications develop to take advantage of, say, hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. And an awful lot of the terminology you're using would be shared between the two trends. So in terms of DAML and where it sits, how familiar would it be, say, to somebody who has gone down, say, that multi-cloud route recently, to start to look at their applications in the DAML context?
I think it depends where you're traditionally from. So if you're, I think in capital markets, we're quite well known, given the, I would say, just the maturity level. In other spaces, I would say this is where we need, to educate, through these forums and give folks the ability to understand that there are tools out there that can assist them. And, I like to point out that DAML is actually open source. So this is not something that you need to purchase. You can immediately start. If you're a developer, we have a community out there that is, very much trying to foster this type of technology in this space and get developers thinking about future proofing. Think of us as an insurance policy. You don't know, the space is changing so quickly. You don't know what's going to happen. So that's how I would put it in context.
Okay. Well, we have one question there where we're being asked, how are DAML smart contracts verified? And thank you for the great talk, it says.
Thanks. It's how are they verified? So I guess, good question. I would probably have to answer that I don't know who asked the question, where I'm happy to give you, I would say, an overview of how verification works and the data model behind it. I don't want to bore people to death with technical talk. So if the person who asked the question, happy to email me and we can get into that. But in essence, we've got fine-grained permissions that are part of our business logic, so that you as a developer don't have to write the code on the permission itself. So that is something that happens behind the scenes.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll certainly capture an email on that, a wider discussion. But just for in the interest of time, I think we'll call it there. So thank you very much to our two speakers this morning, to John Whelan and to Rodrigo Megdenberg. An awful lot of really good information there, and I think quite a good exploration of some of the possibilities as these technologies develop out. So thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. Thank you to our producer for a particularly difficult job juggling so many inputs this morning. So thank you, Sarah, and thank you to ICT Skillnet for hosting us on Zoom this morning. So I'm going to hand back to Professor
Thanks,
O'Connor.
Paul, and thank you very much. As you said, it was an excellent meeting today. It was great to hear both John and Rodrigo looking at what's happening, but also perhaps looking at the future, an exciting future ahead. Thank you to you, our participants, the blockchain community. I hope you'll get in touch with all the chairs. We look forward to your participation. That's what Blockchain Ireland is about, to get the blockchain community involved, both in the working groups and in our policy development. And thank you, Sarah Watson, for helping to facilitate this webinar. Really appreciate it very much. So our next meeting is on February the 23rd, and we have Steve Vallis, who's the CEO of Blockchain Australia, and he's going to talk about Australia's blockchain strategy. And we also have Overstock from Sligo. So this also offers another opportunity to meet again and to see what's happening in the world of blockchain. So thank you all very much for your participation. And as Paul and the speaker said, if you want to follow up on any of the presentations, please feel free to do so. So goodbye and good morning. And I hope all of you stay safe and keep well. And we look forward to seeing you on February 23rd. Good morning to you all and have a good day.
Thanks for watching. You might be interested to know we are now taking expressions of interest for our Masters in Blockchain, which will commence September 2021. Just email your CV to info@ictskillnet.ie.